presentation is working, but we'll go from there. And unfortunately, I do have videos, but we didn't manage to get those working, so we'll just have to wing around that. And I put this talk together for a presentation tomorrow evening as part of the Tusk lecture series at the Royal Geographical Society. So I know this is a highly informed audience, but hopefully you'll find it valuable and interesting. So let me just go ahead and see if I can start. If I can get, nope, it's not moving. We're having a little slide presentation challenges. Okay, so I'm going to talk just a little bit about sort of how I got into conservation, what I've learned over the course of 5 years. Unlike probably everyone in the room, I just got involved in conservation about 7 or 8 years ago as part of working for Paul Allen. And for the last 5 years, I've been completely absorbed in conservation, and I spend about 3 to 4 months a year in Africa out in the field. And I'll talk a bit more about that. Talk about the challenges of applying technology to conservation, what it means to be technology ready, and the fact that we actually have to think about parks being technology ready, and to give a few examples of not being ready at all, being on the way to being ready, and then being ready to actually take it to the next level. And then I'll do a few parting thoughts around that. There we go. You know, it's a bit of a tragic day. I think probably many or most of you have heard that Paul Allen passed away yesterday. So it's a bit of an irony to me. You know, I'm in this space and have found this thing that I love through Paul's leadership and through the ability of his leadership to put us all out there and try and figure out what we could do to help. We started this journey with Paul with the Great Elephant Census. I was lucky enough, one of my first trips, there's a little elephant called Milady that was a rescue elephant that I got to meet and hang out with before she was reintroduced into a herd. It was really the start of a journey for me to try and help understand, particularly with Paul's leadership, how technology could help conservation. And there she is with her family.
If you knew how many elephants there are, what does that tell you?
These 3,000 elephants over here, you know, 30 years ago, they were 30,000 elephants.
The numbers lost each year, staggering, between 35,000 and 45,000 last year. It's an incomprehensible amount.
The challenges that elephants face across Africa are so complex. Loss of habitat, increasing human-elephant conflict, retaliatory killings, exacerbated by the demand for ivory.
The world has come to realize what is happening, and that poaching levels are quite unsustainable at present. Essentially, more are getting killed than are being added to the population in any one year.
The wanton slaughter of these animals, and I think it's only a matter of time before all elephant populations are vulnerable. Planning around how best to conserve elephants is absolutely imperative.
Information is power. If you have the information, you can move mountains. To put the information into the hands of the conservationists, and that includes people who are buying the ivory, we've got to move their hearts and minds just as much as put into the hands of people who are doing the anti-poaching in the field.
We just don't have the luxury to not work together. If we do these things in isolation, we won't get very far.
The best outcome is to make sure that we have these protected areas and these extraordinary animals for 1,000 years to come.
These 3,000 elephants could become those 30,000 elephants again, couldn't they?
a lot of talking about, let me just see, there we go. The video really talked a lot about the Great Elephant Census and what that meant. It was the first big project that Vulcan did. It was an $8 million project. I don't know how many of you are aware of the Great Elephant Census, but basically flying 20 countries, savanna countries, over a 2-year period, and trying to get a status of the elephants. During that process, Paul asked us to find out what we could do besides count them. What could we do in terms of saving them? And I went with my colleague Kathleen Gobush basically on a research trip, and went to a lot of sites and learned about what the problems were on the ground. I think that's a really important thing that we did, and I think we did maybe differently than a lot of other folks do in terms of technology. We went out and asked the folks on the ground what their problems were, what they were trying to accomplish, and what problems they had. And you know, it's been a 5-year journey, and it's been interesting because also during that time, technology up to that time really wasn't applied little or at all to, or in very sort of primitive ways to conservation, certainly in the field. And so really understanding what it meant to put technology in the field was a really, it was eye-opening. And I think for technologists, I still have challenges with my technologists and engineering friends who've never been there, and they take things like as givens, like high bandwidth connectivity and continuous and steady and reliable power, and really simple things like that. That, you know, if you're out there, you learn those things just are not givens, and that you really have to you have to be able to deal with those, and the technology put in the field has to be able to deal with those. And over the course of 5 years, I've been to 14 countries and over, I think it's 28 protected areas now, and everything from forest to savanna. I feel myself very fortunate and lucky to have that perspective, and I think it also brings a perspective of the challenges of technology and how that technology has to be adapted for the setting and for the situation. Just see here. You know, I got a chance to look at a lot of the technology that was out there, and you know, things like these elephant collars. The technology hasn't really evolved in about 20 years now, and you know, it's limited in scope and scale. And I think that's one of the things we're looking at is how do we apply technology in a way that scales, that's a scalable solution. And that's a sustainable solution. Huge problem and endless failures that I heard about from the folks on the front lines with technology getting deployed and then you know, functioning for a short period of time before it. Let's see, is there a clicker or trying to? Yeah. I'll just kind of stand here. You know, so actually getting out in the field and doing some collaring and seeing how tracking is done, and really seeing what the challenges are to applying technology. And I think one of the things that came across really clearly is that there are very understandably a lot of folks on the front lines that are very skeptical about technology. They're very skeptical that it can ever be applied because they've had so many bad experiences, because they have people come in, frankly, people like Vulcan or a big tech company come in and say they're going to save the day, and frankly, a number of NGOs who've set up you know, technology hubs, not really being technologists, and saying we've got the solution. And I've seen some headlines that actually make me angry about, you know, we've deployed this drone, it was the one that everybody loves to beat up on, rightly so, frankly, and say that they've saved the day, and they have their press release, and then they go away, and they've often left the place in worse shape, and certainly at least wasted the time of the folks on the front lines. So you have that side, and of course then that builds the pessimism and the skepticism around applying technology in the field. And so I think there's a sense over the last 5 years as conservation technology, I like to think of it as a field. There are a small group of us now, that's what we do, that's how we talk about ourselves. The WILDLABS.NET is a focus on trying to bring technologists together with the conservationists to create a dialogue. And I think there's a maturing process happening there that the folks who really are sticking in it, the technologists who are really sticking in it in the space, are understanding that this is hard and it's hard work and it's going to take time. It's not a silver bullet, there aren't any silver bullets, but it can provide scaled solutions that otherwise that probably are really difficult to make happen. Over the course of the 5 years, Vulcan has quite literally hit every one of these. There may be something that I've left off here. Actually, the one that I might add here, I said monitoring e-commerce trade, but there's also sort of monitoring trends and scoping. Andy and I spoke about the KBA database. I think there's tremendous scope there, and in fact, Vulcan is doing something with corals that is on that. So I guess I would add that one. But you know, we started with counting. We've done some work with tracking, particularly with folks like Save the Elephants, building apps that people can see where things are. This has been a huge, the secure and protect area has been a huge focus for me. It's been my primary focus. We've also done work on the technology side of anti-trafficking, not developing products. There were some products that could be applied, but using our expertise to evaluate those products and build those partnerships. And in fact, there's a company that we're working with that's been tremendous, giving all of our conservation partners nearly free software and training at cost and things like that. And we have anti-trafficking technology now being effectively used. It's being very effectively used at Fragmented Reserve and across Zambia, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Tanzania, and Kenya. I'm probably missing a couple, but that's been tremendously rewarding. And then human-wildlife conflict, some of the things we're doing, it hasn't been a direct focus area, but indirectly, some of the tools we've been building are helping with that, and we need to put some more focus on that. And then this is the newest thing. Traffic actually just ran a meeting at Microsoft, and this is, to me, that journey over the last 5 years, where you couldn't get Microsoft and Google in the same room, and Traffic held a meeting with a number of academics. Vulcan was there, but Google, Microsoft, Facebook, eBay, they were all in the room talking about how they could try and tackle this problem of wildlife trade and e-commerce systems. So every one of these areas are focus areas for the potential application of technology. Every one of them has their own challenges, and you need people who are really invested in conservation, not just dropping in and thinking they've got a quick solution to help apply that directly. And in fact, I've got a list here, sort of a laundry list of things that I've learned, and I actually wrote this down because I wanted to go, some sort of deeper thinking here about the flaws of open architecture of social goods, and I think this room probably understands that as well as anyone. But it's extraordinarily fragmented, resistant to change, and trying to create convergence between all these individually underpowered nodes of effort is a real challenge, especially when we're all driven by different motivations. There are perverse incentives, financial incentives, resourcing incentives, and frankly, institutional egos and competitiveness. And I think the great news for me is that especially that last part, we're starting to get over that in a space. I know Jonathan Palmer, I just saw him, and we had an incredible meeting at ZSL over the weekend with a SMART partnership and the Vulcan team, really talking about how we bring SMART and a product that we've built called DAS that does real-time protected area management. I'll show you in a minute how we can work together for being better than the sum of the parts, and that's happening all over. And that's new. I think that's really new in the last year. Instead of all of this sort of fighting and trying to compete, we're certainly not competing to make money in conservation, but just really trying to combine forces and get out of the silos and work together towards a bigger thing. Let's see. You know, an example of this is, and I talked quite a bit about this, you know, being able to bring, not work in silos, being able to bring together and to be committed long term. This is actually the DAS showing up here. This is the LAWA NRT Joint Operations Center. One of the complete, at least to me, complete surprises, and the thing that even if the software wasn't there tomorrow has already had impact in what we've done, is actually getting these protected areas thinking about how to professionalize what they do and create standard operating procedures, share best practices. I'm thrilled that, you know, the LAWA folks have been up to, or been to Grimetti, the Grimetti folks, African Parks, the WCS folks. Right before the Smart DAS conference, we had the 4th annual DAS user conference. We had 30 protected area managers and 15 different organizations there. A big part of that meeting was sharing those best practices and then sharing that in the context of this software and this operations center model. So if we, this is actually in Akagera in Rwanda. Here, this is Jess Gruner, the director there, training the team on the implications of the software and how it will help them. And I want to spend the sort of a good bit of the rest of the talk talking about something that that I think has really helped shape our thinking about how and when we should apply the tools that we're creating and the folks we're working with. When I first started working in this space, I saw a lot of funding money going into the worst possible place in my mind, where you have low technical or operational or managerial capacity and you're trying to throw technology in there to put a Band-Aid on or fix a problem. And I'll talk a bit more about that in the context of a particular site. Most of the protected areas, frankly, have a relatively low operational capacity and no tech, but that's better than throwing good funding money at something that's not going to work. And there's a lot of effort trying to move these parks up into this region where they have the operational capacity, and then ultimately, once they're there, being able to really professionalize them with technology and give them force multiplying capacity with technology to move into this quadrant here. I think it's a good framing tool for understanding and evaluating when you show up at a site as a technologist, should I even engage here? I don't know how many of you, I love the Salut. It's one of the, I've been there a number of times. It's an incredible place, 50,000 square kilometers, about 20% larger than the size of Switzerland. There's a photographer named Rob Ross. He'll actually be there tomorrow night. He did a beautiful coffee table book on the Salut. And I'll give him a little plug because it's just a stunning book, and the reason I highlighted it here is it's an example of and look, we took the hard knocks here. It was an example of a place that's just not ready. It doesn't have the preconditions for being technology ready. We went there. There was an imperative, as I'm sure many of you know. The Salut was probably ground zero for the poaching crisis from 2009 to 2014, the elephant poaching crisis during that time. Population went from 70,000 elephants to something under 14,000 elephants in a 5-year period. And we, the U.S. ambassador at the time was urgently asking us to help and others to help. And I went there with my colleague Kathleen. That was one of the first places we went to look to see if we developed this technology for managing a protected area. could we help the Salut? What we came back with was we could help a lot of places, but there was no way we could help the Salut yet. They didn't have the management capacity. They didn't really have the will of the government, and as you can imagine, why, to work. The community wasn't really involved. They didn't have the infrastructure. There were a whole set of conditions that just weren't there. They didn't have an operations center. They didn't have radio towers. They didn't have basic communications. Sort of all these ingredients that you need to even meaningfully at all be able to apply technology. And then even if you had the technology and you could act on the information that was being produced, or you had the information to act on, they didn't have the ranger force to act on it. And so we came back and quite unpopularly said, no, it's not the right place. And we were asked what would be the sort of first thing we could do. And we said, well, they have to have radio communications. The Rangers got deployed for 8 days. No one knows where they are. They just disappear into the woods for 8 days with no comms, nothing. And we said, well, at least we could put up radio towers. We put a proposal together. Great, sad validation of the lack of will to actually make stuff happen. It took 9 months to get the radios through customs. It was just held in customs. There were people blocking it for their own reasons. And when we finally got it through customs, one of those great stories in Africa, they wanted to charge us 9 months of storage fees for the radios. So we finally got them installed. I was actually there in February. They are better than nothing, but what was fascinating, so the digital radios, you can track the Rangers' positions because they transmit a GPS coordinate. The Rangers were all turning them off because they didn't want the management to know if they were going on patrol, where they were going on patrol. And so there was, so they had received some training, they'd learned what it did, and they would turn it on so they could do a voice call and so on. But there just that whole underpinning of actually effectively using technology just wasn't there, and it isn't there, and it's such an important place. But at this point, it's really not about a technology solution. It's about a management solution and so on. So I'm very, very humble about what technology can achieve in places like the Salut, and I hope that it can be figured out because it is such an important place. But I'm never one to stand up and say technology is your solution. It's a multiplier if the conditions are right, and the Salut is such a great example of that. And then if I look here, where there are a number of parks that are sitting here, and what's interesting is how do you get parks up here? Talking as we've moved, and I'll be showing you this. Actually, we've rebranded to Earth Ranger, but I've called it DAS for 5 years, so I'll continue to call it DAS, our Domain Awareness System. We're talking about moving folks from here to here, but there are a relatively small number of folks here, and I'll talk about that. Actually, let me talk about that now. When we started looking at building that command and control system and talking to folks, we went to places like the Grumeti Reserve in Singida. We went to Lewa Conservancy and Northern Rangelands Trust. We went to the African Parks Network. We went to WCS. We worked with Save the Elephants. And I took a little bit of heat for that, actually. Well, geez, you're cherry picking all the easy ones, right? All the really good folks. And it's like, yeah, exactly. That's what we're doing because we're trying to build new software, and that's hard enough. And that was that realization that we're trying to move the folks that are here to here, and then have them help us go to the next level. But what happens to all of these parks? And strategically, we are mostly here. We have done some funding to help move a few parks up here. But this is where a lot of great folks work. It's where Tusk works. It's where a lot of philanthropists work, and it's where Jeff works, and a lot of the funding agencies really moving these parks up here. And this is a heavy lift. But to just take one example of someone that I've just been working with recently, and actually as we've sort of worked with the best folks, and we've got our software working well, and we've kind of moved them into here. We're getting a lot of interest at the folks that are right here, saying we want DAS, and we're saying, wait a minute, that's great, and we love that, but we want to see you move up here, and we're giving them a game plan for how they can, helping them have a game plan for how they can move up there. The Uganda Wildlife Foundation is working with the Uganda Wildlife Authority to move Queen Elizabeth and Murchison Falls up into that category right now. NIASA has just said they want to use, the NIASA Reserve, several of the concessions there said they want to use DAS to move to amplify their operations. They do have some infrastructure, digital radios and so on, and they're working closely with WCS there, and so we're giving them ideas of how to move themselves up in here. And we're working with a lot of folks to share that understanding of what it takes to actually move up. And this is where we're going to really be hoping that we're building a playbook that funders can also, I think a lot of funders have been burned by technology and someone coming and saying, we can do this great technology thing, and then those precious conservation dollars end up over in this quadrant here. And I think if we can give a playbook, don't, not use DAS or use this camera trap or that sensor, but look for these characteristics, look for these set of principles. That was a big thing we've been talking about, building a set of principles to help create a toolbox that will help the folks here move up in here. And a lot of it has nothing to do with technology. It's about, do you have a ranger, a quick reaction team that's properly trained? Do you have 24-hour response or at least 16-hour response? Are your rangers well trained? Do you have management capacity and operational protocols in place? All of those things really have nothing to do with technology, and even if they never deploy technology, it would start to move them up into this category, and that would be a huge win for everyone. And so I think I've taken a huge amount of pride in thinking about how this product, this thing that we've built, this DAS thing, while it's intended to move folks from here to here, because people do get excited about technology, as long as it's done in the right way, we get them thinking about, well, they want to get here, but now we give them a playbook to move from here up into here. I take just a moment and talk about Vulcan and really about Paul's legacy. I think for me, being in this space, the fact that we're in a very unique place as a funder. We grant and fund a lot of work in conservation and many, many other things. We also are technologists, so we build products, but what we've also done is sent our engineers out in the field to sit down with the folks on the front line and understand and try and learn their language a bit so that we can help them understand the technology language, not the how, but the what and what's possible. And I think that was just this huge gap that was missing between biologists and frontline managers being able to talk tech and imagining that there was some potential there, but not being able to understand the language enough. And frankly, the folks sitting in Seattle or Silicon Valley with this idea that, that there's gigabit bandwidth and all of these things, there's just this big valley and gap. And I think what Vulcan has been able to do is be a big part of bridging that gap, and I think that's tremendously powerful and important, and we're trying to amplify that. So I'll spend a few minutes now. I've talked about it quite a bit, but as I went around with Kathleen, I remember getting 4 different hand-drawn things that essentially became what became the now Earth Ranger, but the domain awareness system. And even though there wasn't enough data coming in, there was already a sense, and I went to, for instance, the LEWA operations room, and there were 5 computers, one with a vehicle tracking, an animal tracking system, the radio system, there was a thing for these little communications devices, and all these things were all in silos. They were mostly not getting looked at because nobody knew how to prioritize looking across them. And definitely the analysis across all of those data sets to try and gain insights just couldn't possibly happen. And none of those vendors was motivated in any way to make that happen. There was no motivation or sense for them to make that happen. And this is where we wrote a proposal, took it to Paul, and he approved it. And this is something unique that I think Vulcan is able to do. We've got 6 engineers working on this. We've got user designers working on it. Myself, product managers. There is a team of about 10 or 12 of us, varying times, just focused on this. This is our day job, is to make this system work for conservation and for conservationists, for the protected area managers. Every one of the engineers except the new guy who's only been on staff for three months, we already got plans to get him out in the field. Every one of them has been in the field. Not sitting back in Seattle trying to imagine what it's like to do protected area management, but actually sitting and talking with folks. And I know the folks at Grametti would adopt Michael Coyote, our user interface designer, if they could. But what we've been able to do is bring together all of this data, really focusing on the real-time aspects. We didn't want to duplicate what Smart has done. In fact, we want to amplify what they've done, and actually want to just, since I've thought of it, just take a moment. There's all this, who's doing this, and is this duplication and all of that. And what the Smart partnership has done, first of all, getting 10 NGOs to agree on anything is kind of a miracle, as you probably all can imagine. But and they aren't technologists, and so a lot of my engineering colleagues will knock it for it's not this or that fancy technology. But they were the first ones to really think about data-driven management, to think that parks actually ought to be run in a data-driven way. And then went with that, and I know it was started with MIST, which I've only heard a few times, but I know that evolved into SMART, and I think it's what they did was so important to start moving everyone towards data-driven management. And the DAS, the Earth Ranger, is entirely complementary. It's focused on that real-time aspect. It's focused on ingesting data from technology. And more so than data from humans that are collecting observations. We do collect ranger observations, but in the context of operational situation. I've heard a gunshot. I see spoor. We've made contact. That kind of stuff comes into DAS and arrest information and so on. And so there's a lot of complementarity there. And then what's really powerful, and what we've barely begun to explore, is the analytic possibilities once you've brought all that data together into one place. And here's where fancy stuff like machine learning and image recognition and all of that stuff can start to come into play. We've got just a couple of examples that are early days. There's a group called Pause Milintambe that I know a number of you know about, the folks at USC and what they did with smart data in Uganda. They're now working with us on DAS data, and eventually they'll work on a combined DAS and smart data set. And these machine learning algorithms, they have to have huge volumes of data to make meaning of it. And I think there's huge potential there. We're just talking with folks at ZSL doing a rhino monitoring system for the Rhino Impact Investment Fund. Again, another opportunity. But what's exciting to me is that now that we've done this part of it, and if we work with Smart and are able to make that look like one unified data ecosystem for protected area management, now we can let we can create and I always apologize to my conservationist friends about how techies have stolen the word ecosystem, but we do talk about data ecosystems, but we can create a platform and then allow an ecosystem of analytics tools to come up around it, and come up with all sorts of algorithms and insights that simply wouldn't have been possible before bringing all that data together. And then the core of what we're trying to do is enable that ecosystem, but it's about integration, it's about alerting, and it's about visualization. That's really the core of what we're trying to do. And then let an ecosystem build up around it of tools that people can use. And hook any tools. Anybody that builds a sensor or camera trap, I'll give a couple of examples. Panthera, has done a great camera trap that can transmit in real time. There's another group called Resolve that's got a trail guard thing. And there are a number, Incident Detect at ZSL will be coming out, I think early next year is the target for that. And we're really Switzerland about it. We're completely, as long as you're trying to help conservation, we will integrate your data source in here. And you know, this is also being able to bring in sensor data, remote sense data from satellites. We've only done that on a limited basis. That data tends to be very expensive, but we've integrated firms. If any of you, it's a fire system. It's NASA. It's a NASA feed from about fires. Any fire over, I think, about 30 meters, it can detect. It passes. It does a complete sweep of Earth every couple of days, and so now the managers are able to see fires popping up. In fact, I was just looking with the folks from North Luangwa in Zambia, and they can now see that there are all these fires being set on all the GMA, the game management areas around North Luangwa, and they can at least respond to that and try and get out ahead of that. But just a great example of how that can work. Here's a visualization of it. Just you can turn tracks on. You get a list of reports here, and this is all dummied up data, by the way. But you know, all the kinds of things that a protected area needs, it's built with their input and their feedback, and we really think of ourselves as partners with all of that original set of folks. I think I've mentioned all of them already, but the original set of folks that have really helped us build the system and really solve a problem, as opposed to, hey, I've got this cool widget that's a solution, and then everybody's running around looking for a problem to solve. We started with that. When we took the proposal to Paul, we had 5 organizations signed up to say, if you build this thing that's described here, we will use it. And in fact, they have used it. And let me just say here, yeah, I think one of the things I think I've said already, but it really is fundamentally changing the way. There's just a couple pictures I've taken, because I have to show a couple pictures of wildlife I've taken. I've also become an amateur wildlife photographer in the course of 5 years, and I've had a great time doing that. That's and everybody that knows Sabi Sands says it's not fair to take pictures of leopards in Sabi Sands because it's too easy, but that's true. You know, we really have tried to build on an understanding of what we're building and who we're building it with, and really trying to, and we didn't really understand this at first, but it's been that learning process of understanding, actually, we are working up here with the folks that are already up here that have really excellent operational capacity. They're doing stuff well, but a lot of times they feel handicapped. They feel like they're always behind the ball, and even though they've got the best trained rangers and they're relatively well resourced, no one will ever tell you they're perfectly well resourced, of course, but relatively well resourced. They have good training, they have good management, and all of those things, and they'll still tell you we're just behind the ball, we just can't keep up with the challenges. And those are the folks that we've realized strategically that's who we're focusing on, and we're trying to move them up into this space. And then once we've got them in this space, some of the most advanced ones are helping us do things like try and figure out cool machine learning algorithms to pull out, you know, everyone can give the example of knowing that poaching goes up during full moon, because you know, if you've been in the space enough, you sort of know that one. But every one of these protected area managers will tell you they're certain that there are patterns sitting latent in the data that would tell them all sorts of things, and not just about poaching, but about how to do the ecological monitoring and the management of the space for the health of the ecosystem and the animals that live in it. And they just feel like now they've got the data in one place, and they can help us innovate up here and take this even to the next level. And so, but we had to be really humble and realize that, you know, we're not going to help these folks, at least not for now. hopefully we can help some of these folks move up in here, but really the tools that we're building are taking folks from here to here, and that we need a lot of everyone's help to move these folks up into here.
The Earth Ranger system is incredible because it's in conservation. We are generally bombarded with all sorts of different bits of technology, and these bits of technology are on all sorts of various platforms, and to monitor your park efficiently and effectively, you would end up spending countless hours on all different media platforms trying to locate where your animals are or where your assets are. With the beauty about Earth Ranger is that everything is on one platform. Earth Ranger takes all of these different devices and puts it onto one platform. The heat map and time slider features that Earth Ranger have are incredible. We can use it from both a law enforcement perspective to biological monitoring. Law enforcement perspective, we can, incorporating with the time slider, we can then look at a particular ranger group and we can then see the coverage over the park. So by using this heat map and the time slider, you can see where your rangers have been throughout that month. Are there any particular areas that they're not using? And then with biological monitoring, we can see where our assets are, and our assets, particularly in our park, are lion, cheetah and elephant movements. And using that, we can get a great understanding of the areas that they're spending in, which actually further then helps us in management processes.
First and foremost, it was real-time application of information. I mean, that was the biggest win. That's what we were most excited about. Suddenly now we know where all of our assets are, law enforcement assets are in real time, all pertinent information, collared animals, anything else, and you know, scaling up with the biological and the ecological side. Now you have all of that information just coming into one central point in real time. And that is, at the end of the day, what's revolutionized the way we can act, because you can make so much more informed decisions if you have the right information at your fingertips. You're not making decisions based on information that's a week old or not having recent information available to you.
This was taken on the 10th of October. What is this? The 16th. So not even a week ago. I was in the Serengeti a week ago. We had a 2-day workshop followed by a 2-day smaller workshop. There are, I believe, 15 protected area organizations, 15 protected areas across Africa represented here by the folks in this picture, including our first government group, the Ngorongoro Conservation Area Authority folks came. And let me just take a moment to talk about that. You know, we want to work with the government agencies. I'm certainly getting approached by a number of them, Kenya Wildlife Service, DMPW in Zambia. We really want to work with them. But they do tend to be technology laggards. I mean, and in an honest moment, they'll tell you that. They tend to be very conservative and cautious, I think rightly so. And we're at a point now with a maturity of what we're doing that we can start engaging with these folks and really help them. And in fact, specifically with Ngorongoro, a place that frankly is very well resourced in terms of the amount of revenue that's driven through there from tourism. So they at least have the financial resources to move themselves, but they just don't know what the playbook is. They don't know how to move themselves from that lower left into the upper left quadrant. And they're looking to us for advice, something I certainly wouldn't have anticipated, and yet it's starting to happen. They're starting to see what folks at Grumeti, at Sabi Sands, at African park sites are doing, and it's helping pull them into a better place of management, which is exciting. And then I think towards the last of what I want to talk about, and here I've used that word, data ecosystem. So this is DAS. I purposely didn't put logos or brand names or marketing names on here because it's not about that. And I think it's about a toolbox. And if somebody comes along with a new command and control system that's better, cheaper, faster than DAS, fantastic. We're mission driven. We're about trying to solve the problems. And as I said, no one's in this to make money, and hopefully the people who really care are setting the egos aside and really trying to focus on mission. I mentioned that company, Semanticas, who we're working with here, and then this really is the smart box here. And getting all of these to talk and work with each other, we're well in progress of making that happen. I mentioned, building this ecosystems of analytics tools and so on, and you can already imagine a whole suite of things that can be built here. And then over on this side, also, there have been a lot of false starts here and people coming in to save the day with the widget. It's interesting, if you put a camera trap out and it takes a picture of a poacher, or it takes a picture of the animals, you have that direct causation between I've taken a picture of something and now I can act on it. So it's a very direct link. What's odd about these databases is that they're removed from that. So I always get asked, well, how many animals have you saved with DAS? And that's a really hard question, because you can do correlation, and I'm guessing the folks in this room can help us figure out how to do that causation and metrics and all of that. And we are working on trying to do that, but it is a challenge. But I'm also deeply suspicious of anyone that comes along here and says that their widget, their sensor is going to solve poaching. It just isn't true. But what we're starting to see now is some folks coming in and ready to roll up their sleeves and do the hard work. Everything from, as I've mentioned, some of the NGOs doing great camera trap stuff. I think there's some real promise, I'll have a list, but promise of improving tracking and scaling it. All the remote sensing data, and this is another vision that Paul's had. If any of you haven't searched on Stratolaunch, do that. It's the world's largest plane. It's supposed to, I'm sorry that Paul won't get to see it fly, but it's the world's largest plane, and the idea, the vision there is to try and make getting satellites up into space a lot less expensive, so that we can all leverage the satellite data that we know is really powerful, and then obviously using the humans. But there are a list of folks here that I've learned are good partners that follow a set of principles that mean they're in it for the long haul to really solve conservation problems. And then even here on the networking side, Cisco's been working with the folks at Dimension Data, which is a big IT firm in South Africa. They're doing something called Connected Conservation. They're also learning that it's really hard to have a sustainable technology deployment. You can put your $4 million of your corporate social responsibility money in, and then what do you do? And you get people sort of hooked on this system, and then you say, well, I've run out of money, and you walk away, and now they're stuck with something and they can't maintain it and all of those things. And so looking at how do we structure stuff to not only provide scalable solutions, but provide sustainable solutions. And that's for every single one of these boxes. We had incredibly honest talks at Remedy Reserve last week, where the particular managers told my boss, our vice president of philanthropy, look, you can't just do the standard corporate, 90 days. And if Vulcan decides they're not interested in doing this anymore, we're putting our business on this. We're not buying a widget. We're putting our operational capacity on this thing. We need to know it's going to be around. We need to have a business continuity plan that we can live with. And that was an incredibly powerful message for the community to be telling us, and frankly, all of the technology providers that are coming into the space. And so I'm really optimistic that beyond the potential scalability of technology, we're going to move to, with the partnership of a few technologists that get this and are really committed to the mission, we're going to get to a sustainable technology deployments. And I don't know how I'm okay. It looks like I'm doing okay. I have a list here. I'm not going to go into any of these. I've mentioned a couple along the way. I always think that, or what I've learned is that if somebody's coming to conservation with a technology that is yet to mature, I don't know how many of you have seen this emerging technology curve where you get really excited and everybody's buzzing and there's all sorts of press about it, and then it doesn't deliver on the promise, and you get in, I think they call it the depths of despair or something like that, and where everybody says, oh, it's complete garbage, it'll never do anything, and then you get out to this asymptote where it actually does. Well, goodness, I think we can all point to this word right here. I don't even like to say it anymore. I had one of the managers joke to me that they get so many proposals from technology companies, and they either have the word they have the word drones, Bitcoin, blockchain, drones, and what was the other one in it? I'm forgetting. But he said he's going to start writing back to them and saying, sorry, you only had 2 of the 3 buzzwords in your proposal, so I'm rejecting it right now. And it's so true. But things like wearables, there is tremendous commercial money being put into wearables. I've been in Microsoft's lab. I've been in Google's lab. They're doing some crazy stuff. I mean, some of it's a little scary to me, but putting sensors in your clothing so that it can tell certain things and keep you cool and all sorts of stuff. But conservation shouldn't be trying to innovate there. That money needs to be invested in those commercial spaces, and then conservation can come along and leverage all of that. And that's actually kind of what's happening with the Internet of Things stuff. I've mentioned, if you haven't heard of it, you probably will soon. LoRa, which is a low bandwidth, low power networking system to be able to, the classic commercial example, the silly one, is that your refrigerator will start telling you that you need to pick up milk on the way home and things like this. But this idea that everything is sensed and that you have all of these devices talking to you about your environment, that there's tremendous commercial investment there for the obvious reasons. And now some of that investment can start to get leverage for conservation, and we're starting to see that. These networks are really low cost and they're low power, both really things you have to have for conservation. So, when you're thinking about technology, think about, has it matured to a point where it can live within the constraints of conservation rather than trying to innovate a technology for conservation. And let's see. I ask this question, and maybe I shouldn't, because I don't know if I get people upset, but I think about how many elephants do we want? We counted about 500,000 elephants, and it's funny, it's like if you're in the tech business, especially if you're Amazon or Google, you're measuring everything. You measure every single thing. Have I hit this? Oh, that got this response. Okay, we're going to change this other thing. And yet, in conservation, as a human race, do we want 10,000 elephants? That would probably be enough to serve the tourism industry. But that's not the world I want. I want at least 500,000 elephants. But that means some things. That means we have to have the spaces. None of that has anything to do with technology. Technology can help those things, can help us manage those, the KBAs, but we have to really be able to answer that, and who knows if we can, but we have to be able to answer that. So just a little thought. And then I just wanted to do a call out. We lost Paul yesterday. And that's it. So, thanks.
Thank you so much, Jim.
Yeah.
Do you want to take some questions?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't usually just talk straight for 50 minutes. I like to sort of make it interactive, but hopefully that was informative, and I'd love to take any questions people have. Yeah.
With the DAS system, you're starting to look at actually planning patrol and optimizing patrol routes and that sort of thing.
We're finally there. We finally have enough data in the first deployments, and we're. I think I mentioned to you, we had one of the folks on the PAWS team that does this patrol planning stuff intern at Vulcan to help us start thinking through these things, and especially if we can bring the SMART and the DAS data together, then I think we can start to do some really interesting stuff on patrol planning as just one example of the kind of insights we can get. Yeah.
Has any of the technology you've been working on been in relation to invasive species?
It's a great question, and I have Matt sitting here who spends a lot of his time when he's at Grumeti thinking about invasive species. In fact, we have a report type in DAS for invasive species because of this guy right here. You know, it's one of those where if the data is coming into the system, and certainly the human observation of a species and being able to record that spatially, but then hopefully eventually also with once remote sensing gets good enough to be able to start identifying those in a way that we're a ways from that, but hopefully we'll get there. But then if you get enough data in to be able to analyze it, then yeah, then we should be able to do some stuff with invasive species. And at a minimum, if we can at least start recording those in the system and get it so that the managers can send out teams to do the removal, see if the removal takes or if it comes back, all of those things that you folks know a lot more about than I do. But just putting the tools in place to give you the information to act on that. Yeah. I don't know if that answered your question. But
yeah, I mean, I suppose I was thinking that there's that reactive management, but then there's also the sort of projections as to where invasive species are going to spread to and what implications that's going to have for the distribution of the species you want to protect. So sort of using all that analytical power to project management quite a few years ahead rather reactive as it
But you know, I didn't actually use the word proactive and reactive, but I thank you for bringing it up because look, even what we've got right now is still mostly reactive. You see something, you do something. The power of machine learning to be able to pull those patterns out, and again, you have to have enough data in the system for those algorithms to churn on it. But that, and I've heard the term holy grail a number of times from the protected area managers. That's the holy grail, being proactive, getting out ahead of, oh, we're seeing we've had this sort of reporting of invasive species. It looks like things are spreading like this. Maybe we can get out ahead of that and do some management actions to prevent that from spreading. But that is the holy grail, getting proactive instead of always being reactive. And we're not there yet, but we're on the cusp.
What is the potential for connecting all the different protected area databases kind of together to do the broad analysis?
Yeah. They're not technical challenges. I mean, there's technical work to do that, but that work is entirely doable. The challenges are human challenges. So, you know, some countries, for various reasons, have rules about data going out of their country and being used and combined. Organizational challenges. I think an organization like African Parks Network that has, I think they're managing 15 parks now, they have the potential to bring all of their data into one place and analyze across it and see if they can understand patterns. And obviously you have different threats, you have different landscapes, so you have to be careful what you're inferring. But seeing if there are common patterns across these disparate places is certainly possible. And then bringing that data up into a place where it's looked at for completely different reasons. And Andy and I were talking about the KBA databases of, you know, but being able to flow that data up and look for sort of global or at least regional or continental trends, I hope we get there. But I don't think the problems, I mean, you need funding and you need the resources to build it technically, but it's an entirely solvable problem from a technical perspective. It's the, you know, getting the MOUs and the data sharing agreements and all that stuff in place that's actually the harder effort.
One of the challenges of monitoring wildlife is having collars or sensors that last long enough for you to be able to track sustainably. Is there any research or investment that you're doing on creating collars or batteries that last longer on collars or sensors?
Absolutely. It's actually one of the biggest frustrations for me. You know, I think we did the in the middle, or actually towards the beginning of doing the Great Elephant Census, we did a workshop on animal tracking at Vulcan, and we had folks from Save the Elephants and a number of other organizations come and talk about tracking and what they can do with that information and how that can help them with management. But the technical challenge, that one is interestingly, that one's more of a technical challenge than a human challenge and a data sharing challenge. In fact, the data sharing there, the Move Bank is a great repository of movement data, and then some of the real-time stuff that Save the Elephants and other folks are doing. The Icarus stuff just got launched up, so there, these Icarus tags, I think there's some real promise there. The challenge there is a technical one. It's how do you get these devices on these animals in a way that doesn't harm the animal, and do it affordably. One of those elephant collars right now, buying the collar, paying for 2 years of data, getting the vet and deploying the thing, I mean, you're talking $10,000 for every single, and then you've only got it for 2 years and the batteries die, or it otherwise falls off. And I mentioned the wearables. I think there's real potential, and this is where, talking about myself as a conservation technologist, it's sort of, I think what that means to me is looking out for the animals. Sort of, here's this cool wearable technology that Google, Microsoft, and others are doing some amazing work on understanding how to apply wearables to humans to help sense all sorts of things. And there's a lot of commercial money going after that because of the potential for the market. How can conservation technologists ride on the coattails of that investment and find ways to do that? And we need to partner with our biologist friends who can tell us about, you can't go subcutaneous on an elephant because it'll get infected. But you can shoot huge harpoons into a whale to track it, and it's fine. And all of that sort of understanding that physiology of the animal. So I'm giving you a long-winded answer, but I think we're on the cusp of being able to leverage some of that commercial investment in wearables and apply it to tracking animals. Yeah?
Is Vulcan doing anything in the marine environment? And if not, why not?
So we have a huge project going on with corals. And that just started about a year ago. I think probably quite a number of you know James Deutsch, who was at WCS for a long time and is the director of conservation at Vulcan. He's leading that program. That was one of those things where Paul came in one day and about a year ago and decided that he wanted to help corals, and the next day we had a program on corals and we were looking at projects and so on, and we have many millions of dollars going into grants to help scientists understand and monitor and track. We have a tech team. I think there are 4 engineers that are focused on building a database, working with technologists. There's some folks doing incredible stuff with remote sensing spectrometry to understand the health of corals. So we've got a combination of grants and engineering as well as our own scientists that have really put a whole corals program. So that's one marine thing. The other big marine thing we've done a number of smaller things. Well, some of them not so small. We did what we called FinPrint, which was the equivalent of the Great Elephant Census, but for sharks. And that I think that was tremendously valuable. You're shaking your head, so you must know something about that. I wasn't directly involved in that program, but from all I understand, it's really helped understand what's the dynamics of what's going on in the shark populations. And then the biggest program we have going on, it was a particular passion of Paul's, is to stop illegal fishing. And so we have a big program going on there, a program called Skylight. It's essentially DAS for the marine space. It is focused on the industrial scale deep sea fishing. It's not focused on the small scale wooden boats. And it's all remote sense data. It's electro-optical imagery, it's synthetic aperture radar, it's AIS data, and then combining ship records and people who've been penalized or whatever, and really trying to, there again, look for patterns, look for paired trawling, look for transshipments where they shouldn't be, look for fishing activity in MPAs that are supposed to be out of bounds. It really is it's the corollary to DAS, which is terrestrial. We have the corollary in the deep sea with Skylight. Anyone else?
I think it's probably about time we need to feed you, if that's my only concern. Thank you. Can you just join me in thanking Ted for taking the time to talk to us about all the wonderful